Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 25. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Hello and welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and I have to tell you, I'm not looking forward to today's topic, which is part of why I titled this podcast, I don't want to talk about it. I've been busy all week, but I've been avoiding recording this. And then when I went to record it, I was having issues with my computer and some of my podcast equipment. And I thought, this is a sign. I don't need to be talking about this. But I know that's not true. The fact that I don't want to talk about it means that I should. So I had another topic scheduled for today, and 5 different people sent me a newspaper article and said, I really think you should talk about this on the podcast. And part of why I don't want to talk about it is that it hits home for me. And I then noticed after I had received the article that because I have a lot of lawyer friends on Facebook, that they started to post and talk about it as well. And my guess is that they were also sharing it and talking about it, although not on a deep level, because it hit home for them too. And you may have seen it. It was in the New York Times, and it's called The Lawyer the Addict. A high-powered Silicon Valley attorney dies. His ex-wife investigates and finds a web of drug abuse in his profession. And so the article is written by this man's ex-wife, and he was an intellectual property partner at Wilson Sonsini in Silicon Valley. And she found his body where he had overdosed on many different things. And, as she recounts in the article, she said, he's been working for over 60 hours a week for 20 years. And, things slowly got worse. He said early on, I can't do this forever. I can't handle this pressure. I can't keep up with this. And yet each year turns a little bit longer and you do stick with it. And he would, miss birthday parties. He would miss vacations. He would miss award ceremonies for his children. And he just became more distant and not present. And obviously they ended up getting a divorce, but he was still part of the family. And she hadn't heard from him for a few days. And that's when she actually went to his house and found him. And, we'll get into the substance abuse part. I actually tried not to think too hard about what I was going to say, because I knew that if I did that, I would go to what's easiest and most comfortable for me, which is to just talk about the research and the stats. And I don't want to do that. I want to have a full and frank conversation. But even if you don't have any kind of substance abuse issue, right? I think you can probably still relate to some of his story. And the working 60 hours a week for over 20 years. Missing important events, starting to become someone different you don't even recognize anymore. I think most attorneys can relate to that. And I think that's part of why the way this article was written, it just really gets to the heart of the matter and kind of makes you reflect on, have you become someone that you're no longer proud of and you have no idea how to get out of, the rat race that you're in and how to step away from this person you've become. So going back to the story, she says, that she had no idea that he was abusing drugs because, he was just being his typical self, working all the time, distant, and just focused on himself. And so she didn't recognize that there was any kind of abuse going on. So she was quite shocked to find that he even overdosed. But at that point, she started, just for her own grief and healing, she needed answers. So she started kind of doing her own investigation. And he kept meticulous records of, the drugs that he was actually taking. He was a chemist before he became a lawyer. He was a patent lawyer. And so he was taking, really good notes on that, And those notes would also include notes related to his clients and his matters. But she says that, as she was piecing all of this together and kind of looking at what the last year of his life looked like, two pieces really stood out to me that are just really chilling. And I'll just read from the article. She says, of all the heartbreaking details of his story, the one that continues to haunt me is this. The history on his cell phone shows the last call he ever made was for work. Peter, vomiting, unable to sit up, slipping in and out of consciousness, had managed somehow to dial into a conference call. And, again, I think the reason we relate to this and the reason this story just, hits home is because, how many times have we been really sick when we should have been taking care of ourselves? Or, and we'll talk about this a little bit, we were out drinking and, maybe you wake up with a hangover and you still manage to dial in for that conference call. And so the thought that even when you are at your worst, even when you are so depressed, even when you are popping so many pills and, shooting up heroin, that you're still calling in and doing work, it just exemplifies how dangerous this profession can be and how you can really lose yourself. And then the other part that really stood out to me from the article, again, I'll just read it. At Peter's memorial service in 2015, held in a place he loved with sweeping views of the Pacific, a young associate from his firm stood up to speak of their friendship and of the bands they sometimes went to see together, only to break down in tears. Quite a few of the lawyers attending the service were bent over their phones, reading and tapping out emails. Their friend and colleague was dead, and yet they couldn't stop working long enough to listen to what was being said about him. And yeah, it's as if we become robots. It's as if we become so entrenched in our work that we forget the personal, the human side of things. And I have to admit, I too have been to funerals where another attorney has died or an attorney's loved one has died, and you will see attorneys on their phones. And it's really sad. It's really, really sad. And again, I think to me, the piece about this article that resonates the most is not necessarily the substance abuse. It is this sadness around what we have allowed to become the culture of our profession. And the article also discusses, how do you get to this place? And she found out as she was doing this research that, she then figured out that, which I think most of us probably know, that attorneys have such high levels of depression and suicide and alcohol abuse and substance abuse. And so she was just curious as to why. And so part of the article talks about how it starts in law school. And I've shared this before, but, we have to stop just talking about it and at some point do something about it. I think the law schools need to take responsibility for their role in the profession being so unhealthy and unkind. And I think as lawyers that want to improve the profession, we have to take responsibility to make things different, not just for all of us to exit out and say, it's too hard, don't do it. We have to be the change we want to see. We have to be the change makers. We have to be the ones standing up. And I know from not just some of my own experiences, but also from clients that come with issues, that it's really hard to get others in the profession to recognize, acknowledge, or help other attorneys in need. So, I think one thing that happens that we need to work on is when you see another attorney that you think has some kind of problem. Maybe it's anger issues, right? We have a lot of attorneys with anger issues. Maybe it's attorneys with depression. Maybe it's an attorney with, some other kind of issue. Maybe they're bipolar or have some other kind of mental health issue. Maybe they are drinking too much, or they are so overworked and so stressed out that you know that like they're about to have a panic attack or have a stroke or a heart attack at any moment. We have to be willing to step in. And here's the sad part. Some people are willing to step in and then the firm doesn't allow it. So if someone is reporting to a partner, if someone is reporting to a chairman or a practice group leader or an HR director, that they think another partner or another attorney or someone is struggling or having a problem with alcohol or drugs, what generally happens is it's just brushed under the rug. Lawyers take this approach of that's not our business. That's not our business. As long as they are doing their work, that is none of our business. And these are your partners, right? Like think about what the definition of that even means. Your partner. But that's none of your business. It's none of our business. Or do you have proof of that? What proof do you have? Well, I think you might be making things up. And not that you're intending to, but I'm not sure that the situation is really like that. Maybe just keep an eye on it. Or you've not told anyone else, have you? No one's talking about this. It's important not to gossip. The message is received back when you raise an issue. It's not always helpful. I know attorneys that have questioned whether they should even be reporting attorneys to making anonymous calls to professional boards or to lawyers' assistance programs because their firms, with the information, will not do anything about it. They want to bury their heads in the sand. And unless and until we are willing as a profession to take care of each other, we're going to continue to let each other down. And not only do we bury our heads in the sand and say, oh, this really isn't a problem, or you shouldn't be raising this. It's, this is none of our business. That is a personal issue. In addition to that, we actually encourage and support really unhealthy behaviors. I mean, as lawyers, I think it's well known that it is extremely socially acceptable to drink a lot. And in fact, if you don't drink, you're probably the odd man out. And everyone works crazy hours and they wear it like a badge of honor. People talk about having to miss vacations or not having gone on a vacation or missing events, almost as if that shows how dedicated they are to their work and how dedicated they are to the firm. And it becomes this competition to see who can work the most hours, who can bring in the most work, who can make the most money. But what's the prize? What's the prize? Bragging rights? I mean, we're literally killing ourselves, and yet we're patting each other on the backs in the process, and we're letting each other die. And that may sound overly dramatic and dire, but it's true. Think about how many times this year alone in 2017 that you have read an article or you have heard about an attorney dying, either from an overdose, from suicide, or from not taking care of themselves. We have to start caring. I think I shared with you guys, I don't remember which episode it was in, but I shared that when I was in law school, my very first orientation, when they shared with us the exam schedule, and one of our exams was going to be on the Saturday before Christmas, and it was my best friend's wedding, and I was in her wedding, and I went and said, I'm not going to be able to make it to my friend's wedding. I'm in the wedding. I'm going to need to take this exam on a different day. And I was told that's not possible. This is what it means to be a lawyer. You have to make sacrifices and you will let people down. But this is the profession you have chosen. I mean, that's what I was told by my law school. That's where it starts. I mean, that is where it starts. And some of this article actually says that when attorneys, or I guess pre-law students, come into law school, they're actually pretty healthy. They're very ambitious. They want to change the world. Most people go to law school because they have intrinsic motivators that they want to help others. And by the time they graduate law school, they've already started to change. They're not the same person that they were coming in. And we're more focused on those extrinsic motivators. And it's all about your grades. It's all about law review. It's all about moot court. Then it's all about OCI. It's all about getting the best interviews at the best firms. And then it's about getting clerkships and about making money and making personal sacrifices over and over again because we think we belong in a special club that others just don't get. And if you are a first-generation attorney or have a lot of friends and family that aren't attorneys, you probably can relate to the fact that you sometimes feel alone. They don't get it. They don't get why you're working so much. They don't get why you have to work all the time. They don't get why you are always on edge or in a bad mood. And as opposed to thinking, oh, well, maybe that's a sign that I'm doing something wrong or doing something unhealthy, we're just like, well, they don't understand me. They don't get me. And so we gravitate to lawyers and we're like, these people get me. They understand me. And it just makes it worse because we tell each other this is normal and we are special and other people don't understand us or get us. And there's just such an ego complex involved in that. And we tell ourselves that what we are doing is perfectly normal and acceptable and others just don't get it. When the truth is, in many ways, it's as if we've sold our souls because we've become different people. And what we think is normal and healthy is a little scary. And because you feel alone, because you feel overworked, because it is such an adversarial, combative profession, you start to look for ways to cope. And some people find that in food. Some people find that in alcohol. The statistics do show that it's about 20% of attorneys that self-report abusing alcohol. And anytime you're dealing with self-reporting, it's going to be underreported. So you've got 20% of attorneys self-reporting alcohol abuse. And then I thought this was interesting too in the article. There was a 2016 report from Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation and the American Bar Association that surveyed almost 13,000 attorneys. And consistent with what studies show, 20% of the lawyers admitted that they probably qualify as problem drinkers. And 28% said that they struggle with some kind of depression. 19% said they struggle with anxiety. And everybody answered those questions, right? And then there was a question about, do you use drugs? And 75% of the attorneys skipped the question. They didn't say no, which was an available option. They just didn't answer the question. 75%. They just moved right on past it. And the article says, when you're talking about depression or anxiety or alcohol, those are legal, right? It's legal to do those things, even if it's bad or problematic for you. But when it comes to drug use, some states now allow marijuana, but it's illegal and it's clearly frowned upon. And so as opposed to saying yes or no, you just skip over the question. And if you're skipping over the question, what is that suggesting? And it's interesting because when I was in law school, I was actually not aware of much drug use. There was a ton of alcohol abuse, but not much drug use. But I have friends that went to other law schools that said that the drug use at their law schools were out of control. And it was mostly cocaine. And if you were not participating in that, you weren't part of the cool crowd, which is that was shocking to me when I heard that as a young associate. But, we read the articles about judges and others that are caught up in different things or they're caught with drugs. And we always act like, it's this shocking revelation. But my guess is that there's a lot more of it going on than we think. And I personally know of attorneys that abuse prescription pills. And, my guess is that for every person that there's probably 10 more that are keeping it a secret because we don't talk about this stuff. And if you start down the path of, if you're on Xanax or Vicodin or you keep needing to pop a pill, the more you do it, I mean, this is how addiction works, the more ashamed you are. And it's easier to just keep popping more pills than to tell anyone you've got a problem or to ask for help. In fact, drugs aside, I am always shocked at how many attorneys come to me, whether I'm in a workshop or I'm doing individual coaching or it's a retreat, where someone says, I should probably see a therapist about this. And I'm not a licensed therapist. That's in my contract. And so I'm like, yeah, you probably should. I can't help you with this. But there's this fear. There is this fear of what does that mean and what does that look like if I, a professional attorney, go to see a therapist? What does that say about our profession? That we think getting mental health is taboo and wrong and embarrassing. I mean, we clearly struggle with mental health issues. I mean, that is like statistically proven. And yet there is some kind of shame or embarrassment to get any help. You know, for me, there's no shame or embarrassment in that because I've experienced it my entire life. And, you know, I'm not going to get into all the details, but my parents took me to my first therapist when I was a very, very young child. Mostly because I was moody and angry all the time. And if you've heard some of the previous podcasts, I think the truth was just I was moody and angry for growing up in a town that I did not feel like I belonged in. But that aside, even in high school, I mean, that was probably the first time that I had been prescribed an antidepressant. And so for me, it was just, that's what you did. You were supposed to go to therapists and be on antidepressants. And so, you know, that continued when I was in law school. And then when I was an attorney, it wasn't actually, and this kind of goes to it hitting home for me, it wasn't until my life really started falling apart and I had a family member that was really struggling with an addiction that I said for the first time, you know, I want to come off of this because it's important that I feel this. And we could do a whole other episode on that. I think we overprescribe medication in the US. And although I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with going to see a therapist, and it would be really good for you to do so, just talk things out and talk about how stressed you are and anxious you are. I think we put way too many people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine, which just leads to more prescription abuse, as opposed to helping them get the tools to work through issues. Although there is certainly some people that need it and there is a time and place for it, I personally believe that it is oversubscribed. And so I think it's more likely that your just generalist, your internist is more likely to put you on an antidepressant and you're okay with that, but you're not okay to actually go get help or to go to some type of behavioral workshop that's going to help you work through some of these issues. And so I would just say to you, if you've ever thought maybe a therapist would be helpful, I highly encourage you to do that. I personally have experienced many different therapists throughout my entire life, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I would encourage you to be brave enough to go do that as well. It's just like going to see your doctor and getting your annual exam. It is health care, and you deserve to be healthy and well. And if you think that you might be abusing alcohol, or maybe you are abusing prescription pills, maybe you are a little bit further into that and you are doing some harder core drugs, whatever your vice, if you think you need help, I encourage you to ask for it. And maybe you don't ask your law firm because they may not actually think you have a problem. Right? This is burying the head in the sand. Go to a friend that you know will help you or reach out. Most every single state has some type of assistance program. We have an amazing program in Tennessee. It's called the Tennessee Lawyers Assistance Program. And so if you don't even know where to begin, contact them. I guarantee you they would be happy to refer you to an organization in your state or a national organization that can help. But most of these places you can make anonymous phone calls. They have support groups. They can give you tools and resources to help you, and no one ever has to know. And in Tennessee, we'll put that link in the show notes. It's tlap.org. but I encourage you to ask for help. And, I'll just tell you personally, when I was dealing with having a loved one suffer from addiction, part of my legal issues, right? Like, I wasn't the one with the substance abuse problem. But because of everything that is the same that is in this article, I was working way too many hours. I was caught up in my clients' issues. I thought that work was more important than anything else. Basically, I had allowed this addiction to flourish. I didn't see any of the signs despite it being right in front of my face. And as someone who is on the other side of addiction, a loved one, it is so painful to see someone that you love suffer and feel helpless and not know how to help them. I will tell you, when I finally realized what was going on, I paid a lot of money for someone to do an intervention, and I'm just lucky that it worked. I'm lucky that the person went to rehab, and I'm lucky that that person is still working recovery today. But I think as lawyers, we do have a tendency to either be likely to fall into unhealthy patterns such as drug abuse, or to enable those around us to abuse drugs or other things because we are too busy to notice. And so I think, it's sobering. It's not something that's easy to talk about. And there's just so much pain involved for everyone, both for the person that is struggling and abusing and for the loved ones that see them hurting and don't know how to help. So I just encourage you that if you are struggling, if you need help, please reach out and get the help that you need. It is never too late. And if you know of someone that is struggling, please don't cover it up. I mean, I know I've done it, and I know a lot of other attorneys that have done it. When you know someone else that is struggling, you tend to want to cover it up because you don't want there to be malpractice, and you don't want other attorneys to know, and you don't want clients to know. It's important that you don't cover it up. It's important that you address it head on. And if you report it to your firm and your firm buries their head in the sand, that does not give you a license to say, well, I reported it and it's no longer my problem. We have to look out for each other. We have to be there for each other. And I think part of that is just learning to be more supportive as we try to become a profession that is not so focused on work and billable hours and always competing to one up the other. Let's try to remember who we were before we went to law school. And if we liked that person better, let's try to find them because they're still there. They're still deep within. And let's try to recover those people and allow them to show up in the profession, to start to change the profession so that it can be an honorable and healthy profession in which to live and thrive. All right. So I encourage you to read the article. It's very well written, and I appreciate you listening to me today. This was not something I wanted to talk about, but many of you reached out and asked me to do so. And I did it. All right. Thank you for joining me today. Feel free to go to the show notes, go to the website, hustleandflowpodcast.com, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. You can also always email me, heather@heatherjoyhubbard.com. I love hearing from you and getting your ideas. If there are other things you want me to talk about, just reach out and let me know. All right. Have a great week, everyone, and I will see you in the next episode. Are you feeling stuck or frustrated in your career? Are you exhausted from trying to balance so many competing demands? Do you have big dreams and goals, but no time to focus on them? Then join me in a small group of female attorneys for the Life and Law in Balance retreats at Miraval. They're coming up in September. To learn more and register, go to lifeandlawimbalance.com. I'd love to meet you there.